Okay. I'm Deborah Woroff here in Boston for MECFS Alert with Dr. Anthony Komaroff, professor at Harvard, and as many of you know, one of the leaders in the field of taking care of and researching MECFS patients. Now, I'd like to start. I've known your name for so long, I've forgotten how you got into this field. Did you do a residency in infectious diseases, or how did it start?
No, I am a general internal medicine specialist. And it started because a patient happened to walk into my office with something I'd never heard of before, an acute infectious-like illness that was followed by now years of debilitating fatigue.
And that had never been seen before by any of your colleagues at
Oh, I'm sure it had been. It was the first time it was seen by me, but I'd never seen anything in a textbook about it. The problem of fatigue is very common.
Yes.
But when someone says, I was perfectly healthy, and then one day I came down with this flu, this virus, whatever term they use, and it wasn't that different than other flus I've had in the past. What was different was I'm still no better, and it's years later. And that was new.
This was about what year?
1983.
So it was before the Holmes definition. It was before there was anything in any literature about it.
Right.
So how did you approach this? What did you do?
I heard shortly thereafter about other doctors around the country who were also seeing patients like this and beginning to study them. Doctors at the National Institutes of Health, in Atlanta, in Denver, Colorado, and so we all got together and compared notes and collectively began to study it.
So this was really happening before the Incline Village outbreak, or contemporaneously?
Yes, and then I heard about the Incline Village outbreak maybe a year and a half or two after I became interested in this, and went out there, brought a team out to study it.
I remember you did quite a lot of epidemiology, in fact.
We did.
And you eventually published it.
Yes.
There was a lot of this and that going on before it actually made it into print, as I recall. It was a couple of years.
Yeah, it was a big study, and it took a long time to get all of the data organized. But
you didn't find yourself tracing back to Ramsay in England? You didn't make that connection at all?
No.
You did?
I did. I knew about Ramsay's work, and I knew about the many apparent epidemics of this illness that the Centers for Disease Control had studied, and similar agencies in other countries had studied.
Oh, so there was more of a foundation than we've been led to believe.
There was definitely a foundation, but it was nearly invisible in the standard textbooks of medicine, which is why I had never heard about it.
And we didn't have such good computer retrieval at that point.
No, we had none. It was a paper-based, very laborious process.
Yeah, not to find it. Well, we've come a long way. Now, how much are you dividing your time? You've got this enormous job of Harvard Health Letters, yet you're also seeing patients. Are you doing any research anymore, or you're reviewing research?
No, I'm also participating in research, but I'm participating in studies that other investigators are taking the lead in organizing. So I would say I'm more of a participant than an organizer of research.
And you don't have to wash the lab vessels anymore?
No.
Good. So how much of your time are you spending on the patients now, do you think?
It's a small fraction of my time.
Yeah.
Probably 15%.
And I assume you're not taking new ones, or?
Occasionally I am, but I have such a queue of people who've already asked to be seen that it's very hard.
And how many other doctors have been trained up in the Boston area to look after patients in this area? I know there's a woman I've heard of.
There's a colleague over at Mass General Hospital in the infectious disease group. And then there's another infectious disease person at a local hospital. And there's several other physicians who have practices where they see patients, but it's very few relative to the demand for care.
Yeah. That It's always less than the demand, and we're completely absent from so many parts of the country. I mean, I feel sorry for people who get sick in sort of Smith County, wherever, how they will ever find their way out of it or get any care. What would you suggest for that? What could be done for people like that?
Best suggestion I have is if I know someone in the geographic area, I will give the name of that person to whoever has inquired. But more often, what I say is find a local support group and see if they have identified local physicians who are knowledgeable and sympathetic.
I do find from reading comments that people send into chat groups and so forth that sometimes they have doctors who can be trained. Do you ever participate in helping them out or assembling reading lists? Or?
Yes, indeed. And in fact, the Centers for Disease Control has launched a very major effort to educate physicians around the country that I've contributed to, but it's really the CDC that's led it. And there's a great interest among doctors all over the country. And in contrast to 25 years ago, when my interest in this began and no one had ever heard of this, virtually every doctor now knows about it, and a lot of doctors know a fair amount about it.
I'm surprised.
Yeah, it's true.
That's good.
According to a survey that the CDC did, I think about 70% of American physicians not only knew about the illness, but had seen patients in their practice with it.
Because I find when I look at the CDC pages, what they have up on the web, it doesn't necessarily tell you about that many areas or aspects of the illness. But you find it covers, I mean, does it really cover the immune aspect? And that you might want to do something about the immune reactions or...
It discusses them, but the reality is we don't yet have scientific proof of a way to beneficially adjust this immune overreaction that is seen in so many patients with the illness.
So really, I guess the state of the art for practicing medicine is still behind what you could see at the conference we were both at, or the two conferences where everyone is talking about these great new discoveries and so on.
Right now, what I say to practicing doctors, and I give a lot of talks to practicing doctors, is what you want, we don't have. We don't have a diagnostic test that really allows you to say, you have it or you don't. And we don't have a proven treatment. Those are the two things every doctor wants. But what we do have, in contrast to 25 years ago, is evidence of lots of things that are objective biological abnormalities in the body of people with this illness that we can identify. Understanding those things is going to lead to diagnostic tests and to effective treatments.
Do you recommend that that doctors test for some of those abnormalities, like say just an ordinary, relatively cheap test for low NK cell count, say? Do you think it's helpful to doctors to get those elementary kind of parameters?
Well, you see, that test in particular I would not call elementary. I would say that while it may be offered by a handful of laboratories around the country, I'm not convinced that all of them really do it well. So, in fact, most of the tests, like ones that were discussed at the recent San Francisco conference, I regard as for research only, not for routine use in clinical care, in part because they're very hard to do well, and even in the labs where they're done well, they're very hard to mass produce to deal with large number of patient samples.
Oh, that's interesting. So we can't really we can't count on our laboratories to do them up to a standard for practice.
These more state-of-the-art tests that are the subject of research conferences.
Yeah. Now, I thought your summary at the end of the conference was excellent.
Thank you.
And I think very helpful as a document going forward to tell people what's going on and what's new. What is your personal reaction to the news about telomeres? What are your thoughts on that? To find out that like the elderly, we have short telomeres. I'm very upset.
Well, all of us have shorter and shorter telomeres as we get older.
Yes.
That's a normal part of aging.
Yes.
Of the body of the cells. What this one study, and it's just one study that hasn't yet been reproduced in other laboratories, showed was that people with chronic fatigue syndrome seem to be aging more rapidly than people of the same age who don't have the syndrome. Whether that's from just the stress of living with an illness that is debilitating and poorly understood, or whether there's something more about the biology of the illness that makes the telomeres shorter, that's uncertain.
Yeah, because I read something, there's only a couple of rare diseases where you see shortened telomeres, at least so far.
Well, I'm not sure that's true.
Really?
There are a number of studies where people whose telomeres are shorter are shown to have greater risk of various neurodegenerative diseases, atherosclerosis in the decades to come. So it's linked to a number of major diseases, but whether it actually participates in the biology of those diseases is much less certain.
Right, or is it just coincidental?
Yeah.
Well, one more thing, going from the most advanced science to some much older methods and sciences, I think that you could have knocked over with a feather about half the people at the conference in last month in California when they got hold of the article from your column, Ask Dr. K, and it recommended in really just one sentence, you said that you supported doing CBT and GET. And people, understandably, there's a long political background to this and a lot of arguments. But I find, I tried to look into doing CBT, and I found that I didn't really know, and no one really knew, what kind of CBT. There's all kinds of CBT. It's used a lot in this country in lieu of psychotherapy because it's something insurance companies will pay for, that you can take care of patients fairly quickly, or at least hope to do so. And can you tell us what really are the mechanisms where CBT changes the metabolism or the thought process? How does it work, and which kind are we talking about using?
Well, I'm not an expert on CBT.
But you have some opinion.
I read literature. I have an opinion based on several published articles that were randomized trials that show that people treated with CBT cope better with the illness and function better. Not all people, and no one, to my knowledge, is cured by CBT.
Yeah.
I think it is an effective treatment in helping people with chronic organic or physical disease cope with the disease. And there's scientific studies in the literature that say that. We had colleagues here who were experts in CBT 15 years ago who talked with those in the United Kingdom who had pioneered this treatment, and they adapted their approach to what was done in Britain, and they got good results.
In terms of people coping?
Yes, but not in terms of curing the illness.
No.
And certainly, I'm aware of no evidence that says you change the underlying biology of the illness by CBT. It's a way of helping you cope with suffering. And I'm sorry it's become politicized, because I think that that kind of aid is very important to people.
Yeah, well, it became politicized because Britain has a nationalized health system, and therefore it is political in Britain. So it was inevitable. And then what would be the equivalent response for GET, for graded exercise? People have horror stories about people being forced to go too hard and collapsing, and of course that's a a function of how many good physiotherapists are there in the world and how well it's done. But where do you see the usefulness of this, and what kind?
It has to be very slowly graded, and not everyone is going to respond with benefit. Some people, the post-exertional malaise that is triggered by exercise makes it impossible for them to use GET. It just is counterproductive. But that's not the typical reaction in the patients that I've seen. In patients where you start the exercise at a very low level, not much exercise, not sustained for very long.
Well, for example, I was going to wear a leotard today so you could demonstrate, but I didn't. But so, can you give us some example of what would be done?
A treadmill at 2 miles an hour for 5 minutes a day. And do that for a month. And if you're tolerating it, go up to 10 minutes.
And the person who did that would be better than the person who sat home in what ways?
Their capacity to function, their energy level would be better. In some patients, their ability to concentrate is better.
Interesting.
But as I said, it's not everyone.
No.
Chronic fatigue syndrome, myalgic encephalitis, probably is a group of different, somewhat different disorders that all have the same name. It has subgroups, and some subgroups are not going to benefit at all from a graded exercise, and others will. We just aren't smart enough yet to predict in advance who falls into which subgroup.
Okay, well, it's good to, you know, people use the acronym so much and we don't talk about what it is. Yeah. But thank you for explaining that.
You're welcome.
Very nice to see you again.
Nice to see you, Deborah.
Take care.